They say royal blood never runs cold. But what happens when the crown itself decides your bloodline no longer matters? When your name, once written in gold, is suddenly scratched out in silence, without ceremony, without warning. That's exactly what happened when King Charles III made one of the most symbolic, yet brutal, decisions of his reign, removing Prince Harry and Prince Andrew from the powerful roles of Councilors of State. The announcement didn't come with trumpets or breaking news fanfare. It slid quietly into the record, almost like a bureaucratic adjustment. But make no mistake, it was a calculated strike. And for two men who once represented the beating heart of the modern monarchy, this wasn't just administrative paperwork. It was exile. Again, before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The question is, why now? Why this? And what does this tell us about what's really going on inside Buckingham Palace? Behind the locked doors, behind the rehearsed smiles, behind the polished speeches. Because this move, though presented as a legal technicality, is soaked in family drama, political pressure, and decades of resentment finally boiling to the surface. Before we dive into the present, let's rewind for a moment. Picture the old world of the British monarchy, strict, ceremonial, and unbreakable. Only a select few royals could ever act on behalf of the monarch. They were known as Councilors of State. They had the authority to sign state documents, attend Privy Council meetings, and represent the king or queen in moments of absence. It wasn't just a title, it was a statement of trust. If your name was on that list, you weren't just royal by birth, you were royal by purpose. Prince Harry once had that privilege. So did Prince Andrew. Both sons of the monarchy. Both expected to carry the institution forward. But in the span of a few years, their names have become synonymous with controversy. And now, the monarchy has quietly shut the door on them, not through scandal headlines, but through something much colder, royal procedure. But the timing? That's what makes it extraordinary. Because this isn't a random move. It's strategic. And it says more about the current state of the royal family than any interview, press statement, or documentary could ever reveal. Think about it. King Charles, only recently settling into his reign, faces more pressure than any monarch in modern history. Public confidence is fragile. The Commonwealth is fracturing. His own son, the one once called the Spare, has become the crown's loudest critic. And then there's his brother Andrew, the man whose scandals have done irreparable damage to the royal name. Two men, both born into royal privilege, both stripped, in their own ways, of royal dignity. And now, both excluded from the inner workings of the monarchy. But here's what makes this move even more intriguing. It wasn't announced with outrage or punishment. It was done with eerie calm. A legal notice. A matter-of-fact statement. As if removing a son and a brother from royal authority was nothing more than adjusting a guest list. That's the chilling part, the quietness of it. Because in royal politics, silence always means strategy. So let's ask the real question. Was this decision about protocol or power? Was it about preserving the image of the monarchy, or was it a personal decision, a father's revenge disguised as royal reform? The truth lies in the tension between those two ideas. And if you listen closely to royal insiders, this decision didn't just happen overnight. It was brewing for months, perhaps years. Imagine the meetings inside the palace. Lawyers whispering in corridors, private secretaries balancing tradition with modern necessity, and Charles, the new king, watching as his family's fractures became too deep to ignore. He had to decide, who could he really trust to act in his name? Who could carry the dignity of the crown when he couldn't? The answer, it seems, was not his own son, not his own brother. And that's where the emotional weight of this story hits hardest. Because beneath the formality, this isn't just a royal restructuring. It's a family cutting its own members loose. Let's not forget, Prince Harry was once the face of royal renewal. The charming, mischievous redhead who brought laughter to state visits and heart to public service. His bond with the late Queen was undeniable. Even after stepping away from royal duties, there was always a faint hope. Maybe one day he'd return, reconcile, and reclaim his place. But this move quietly shattered that hope. You don't remove someone from royal constitutional power if you ever intend to let them back in. And then there's Andrew, the Queen's favorite son, the man once called steady, loyal, devoted. Before scandal consumed him, Andrew represented a different kind of royal image: military discipline, duty, service. But when his name became linked to one of the most explosive controversies in modern history, that image collapsed. And though the Queen protected him for years, her death left him exposed. Now, Charles has finished what the world began. Andrew's royal career is over, his access revoked, his name erased from official power. But here's the part almost no one talks about. The two men's exclusions were handled identically, even though their sins are worlds apart. That's the quiet brilliance and cruelty of Charles's move. By treating them the same, he sends a message. Loyalty isn't about blood anymore. It's about trust. And both Harry and Andrew, for different reasons, have lost his. Now imagine being Harry, waking up in California to see a legal document in Parliament listing your father's decision. That your name no longer holds weight in royal law. That even if your father fell ill or went abroad, your signature would mean nothing. You're still a prince, but only by name, not by power. How do you react to something like that? Rage? Shock? Regret? Maybe all three. Because for Harry, this wasn't just another rejection. It was the final confirmation that his rebellion, his freedom, came with a price he never fully understood. Freedom from the crown also means being cut from its future. And no apology, no memoir, no Netflix documentary can change that. Now, shift to Prince Andrew. Unlike Harry, he didn't have public sympathy to lose. He's been living in isolation, his reputation long destroyed. But for Andrew, being removed from the Councilors of State list was something deeper, a reminder that his royal existence has become ceremonial at best. The titles remain, but the trust is gone. The door to redemption? Locked. Permanently. And while the public might cheer this decision, calling it overdue, necessary, even moral, there's a darker undertone to it. Because this isn't just about accountability. It's about control. Charles is consolidating the monarchy, trimming the edges, and tightening the circle around himself and his heir, William. The message is clear. The new royal order will not tolerate unpredictability, controversy, or scandal, even if it comes from within. That's why this story matters now. Because it marks the moment the monarchy officially drew a line in the sand, not between royal and commoner, but between insider and outsider. Those who represent the institution and those who represent a threat to it. What's even more fascinating is how the palace choreographed this moment. They didn't announce it with drama. They leaked it subtly, allowing the press to discover it organically. Controlled chaos, the royal specialty. That way, the monarchy looks calm, decisive, and dignified, while the excluded parties look powerless, reactive, and emotional. A perfect narrative reversal. But here's the twist. This exclusion wasn't just about who's out. It's also about who's in. Because every seat vacated creates space for new power players. And some of those names might surprise you. The replacements tell their own story. Who the king truly trusts, and who he's quietly grooming for the next phase of the monarchy. It's less about removal and more about realignment. And that's where this saga takes a fascinating turn. Because in the process of excluding Harry and Andrew, Charles didn't just clean the slate. He rewrote the royal hierarchy entirely. He promoted loyalty. He rewarded silence. And he made a statement that every royal, from and to Edward to William, understands perfectly. You're either with the crown, or you're not part of it at all. But let's not pretend this was easy for him. Whatever you think of Charles, he's still a father and a brother. Behind the regal robes is a man trying to preserve something fragile, an institution constantly walking the line between tradition and scandal. And perhaps, in his eyes, this was the only way to protect it. Maybe he believed that by removing the weak links, he could restore the crown's strength. But in doing so, he may have created new divisions that could haunt his legacy. So here we are, a monarchy in transition, a father at war with his own son, a brother erased from the royal ledger, and a nation wondering what the crown really stands for in the 21st century. It's not just about power anymore. It's about survival. Because make no mistake, this move wasn't about punishment. It was about preservation. A king guarding his throne from both enemies and family. And as the dust settles, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The royal family isn't just losing members. It's losing its soul. But what's coming next? That's the real story. Because buried in this constitutional reshuffle lies something far more personal, far more explosive. Documents, conversations, promises made and broken, all pointing to a single question no one in the palace dares to ask aloud. Did King Charles betray his mother's final wishes in order to secure his reign? There was a time when both men, Prince Harry and Prince Andrew, stood as pillars of royal promise. One was the golden-hearted soldier who fought for his country and captured hearts across the globe. The other, the Queen's favored son, the embodiment of royal dignity and service. Together, they represented two sides of the same crown: youth and experience, passion and protocol. But the tragedy of their story isn't just how far they fell. It's how fast the crown turned its back on them once they became liabilities instead of assets. It's almost poetic, isn't it? Two princes, one exiled by choice, the other by scandal, both now erased from royal authority. Their falls couldn't have been more different, but the outcome was the same. The monarchy cut them loose. You can almost hear the irony echo through the marble halls of Buckingham Palace. Harry, who claimed to break free from a system that trapped him, now finds himself officially unneeded by that very system. And Andrew, who once basked in privilege under his mother's unwavering love, is now locked out of the corridors where his voice once carried weight. But let's rewind the story, not to the headlines, not to the documentaries, but to the moments when their paths began to fracture. Because understanding their exclusion means understanding their downfall, and how each decision they made slowly turned into their undoing. When Harry was born, the United Kingdom celebrated the arrival of the spare, the boy who secured the line of succession, the symbol of stability behind his older brother. But no one could have predicted that this same boy, with his mischievous grin and fiery spirit, would one day become the monarchy's greatest headache. Harry wasn't built for quiet obedience. He was emotional, impulsive, and too human for an institution that worships restraint. He didn't fit the script. Andrew, on the other hand, was royalty to his core. Polished, confident, a man who carried himself with the posture of privilege. As the Queen's second son, he lived a life cushioned by respect and rank. He served in the Royal Navy, became a decorated veteran of the Falklands War, and for years was viewed as the monarchy's dependable workhorse. But beneath that decorum was a man who thrived on indulgence. The royal jet-set lifestyle, the expensive friends, the lavish habits, they all became his trademark. Two princes, two destinies that seemed untouchable. And yet, decades later, both would end up at the same destination: public disgrace. Harry's downfall didn't happen overnight. It started as a whisper of frustration, a growing discomfort with the royal routine. The endless ceremonies, the press intrusions, the cold expectations. It's easy to imagine the young prince, staring out of a palace window, wondering if this was truly his life's purpose. And when Meghan Markle entered the picture, that restlessness exploded into rebellion. She was bold, ambitious, outspoken, everything the royal system fears. Together, they became a symbol of modern change, and for a moment, the world believed the monarchy might evolve. But evolution requires trust, and trust is the one thing Harry never felt from the institution that raised him. The Megxit bombshell wasn't just a decision to step back. It was a declaration of independence from a crown he believed had failed him. The problem? The monarchy doesn't forgive rebellion, especially not when it's televised. Andrew's fall was uglier. There was no noble cause, no moral justification, only scandal. His friendship with a convicted predator didn't just stain his reputation, it obliterated it. And when he sat down for that now infamous BBC interview, hoping to clear his name, he unknowingly wrote his own royal obituary. The public saw arrogance, detachment, and denial. He didn't come across as a wronged man. He came across as a man who still believed he was untouchable. In the court of public opinion, he was guilty long before any investigation concluded. And while the monarchy couldn't imprison him, they could do something worse: erase him from public life. For years, both men remained symbols of two royal disasters, one of disobedience, one of disgrace. But what united their stories was the slow erosion of faith from within the palace walls. The Queen, ever the matriarch, tried to hold her family together. Yet even she couldn't stop the inevitable. When she passed, Charles inherited not just a crown, but the burden of a fractured family and a tarnished brand. That's when the reckoning began. Inside Buckingham Palace, a shift took place. The conversations turned from compassion to calculation. Who could be trusted? Who could act on behalf of the new king without embarrassing the monarchy further? The answer was painfully clear. Not Harry, not Andrew. Both men represented instability. Both carried headlines that made donors and allies nervous. And both had, in their own ways, insulted the dignity of the institution. You might wonder, could Charles have forgiven them? Maybe once. But forgiveness in the monarchy isn't sentimental, it's strategic. To forgive is to risk association. And to associate with failure is to weaken the crown itself. So, while the public saw only the official list change, the exclusion of 2 names from a royal register, the reality was far more personal. This wasn't a procedural shuffle. It was a message carved into royal law. You no longer represent us. Imagine what that feels like. For Harry, a son whose life was defined by duty, now being told his role is meaningless. For Andrew, a man who once strutted through palace corridors as if they were his birthright, now being told he no longer belongs in them. It's almost Shakespearean, 2 fallen princes, undone not by enemies, but by themselves. Yet what's truly fascinating is how differently they responded. Harry fought back. Through interviews, memoirs, documentaries. He turned his pain into a weapon. Every revelation, every accusation, every tear on camera was his way of reclaiming power. But in doing so, he proved Charles right. A Councilor of State must protect the crown, not provoke it. Andrew, by contrast, went silent. Hidden behind high walls, seen only on rare occasions. His silence wasn't noble, it was enforced. But in that quiet, he showed something Harry never did: submission. And yet, even that couldn't save him. Because in the end, silence and rebellion lead to the same royal graveyard: irrelevance. There's a cruel irony here. The monarchy demands loyalty but punishes individuality. It celebrates family but thrives on hierarchy. Harry and Andrew, though worlds apart in personality, both crossed invisible lines. One challenged the system, the other disgraced it. Both paid the price. But the deeper tragedy is this: their downfalls didn't just expose their flaws, they exposed the monarchy's hypocrisy. A system that claims to stand for moral integrity, but has spent decades burying its own scandals. It forgave infidelity, deceit, and cruelty, yet could not forgive authenticity or shame. When the institution felt threatened, it didn't reform. It retaliated. And Charles, as a son of that system, learned the lesson well. The new king isn't sentimental. He's pragmatic. And the exclusion of his brother and son was less about anger than it was about strategy. 2 weak links had to be cut before they could pull down the chain. Behind palace walls, whispers began to spread. Senior aides called it the Quiet Reformation. No press release. No royal drama. Just a signature. A removal of 2 names. A rewriting of history. To the public, it looked procedural. But to those inside, it was personal warfare disguised as constitutional housekeeping. That's what makes this decision so haunting. Because both Harry and Andrew still carry their titles. They're still royal by blood. But the power? Gone. The trust? Shattered. They exist now in the royal limbo, too royal to be ignored, too scandalous to be included. And what's even more painful for them both, especially Harry, is that the monarchy will continue just fine without them. The palace machine doesn't pause for individuals. It recalibrates, replaces, and moves on. The crown survives every storm because it sacrifices whoever becomes the lightning rod. It's easy for the world to mock them, the disgraced prince and the runaway duke. But imagine the psychological weight of realizing that your family name no longer shields you, that the institution that defined your identity has deleted your function. For Harry, it's the ache of irrelevance. For Andrew, it's the humiliation of redundancy. And yet, despite their disgrace, they remain bound together by the cruel symmetry of fate. Both trapped between 2 worlds, royal blood and public exile. Both symbols of the monarchy's new ruthlessness. But as we peel back the layers of this story, one question keeps echoing through every gilded corridor. Did Charles act as a king, or as a man finally taking revenge for years of personal humiliation? Because let's not forget, Harry exposed family secrets to the world. Andrew's scandal tarnished the royal brand during the Queen's final years. For Charles, this wasn't just housekeeping. It was catharsis. The crown may forgive, but Charles the man? Perhaps not. Still, there's something almost tragic about it all. In cutting them out, Charles hasn't just simplified the monarchy, he shrunk his family. The House of Windsor was once a symbol of continuity, of shared duty. Now it feels more like a fortress with fewer windows and thicker walls. And yet, the story isn't over. Because while Harry and Andrew have been removed from the Council of State, there's one final twist. A quiet addition that reveals everything about who the king truly trusts. The replacements. The new names that stepped into the roles once reserved for his brother and son. Those names tell the next chapter of this story. They reveal who stands closest to power, and who the king now relies on to carry his legacy forward. It didn't happen under flashing lights or screaming headlines. There were no televised addresses, no public declarations, no royal press conferences. The entire decision, one that effectively rewrote royal authority, slipped through the cracks of the daily news cycle like a whisper in an empty hallway. And that's exactly how King Charles wanted it. Because when you're restructuring the foundation of royal power, silence isn't cowardice. It's strategy. On paper, it was just a simple amendment, a technical modification to the Regency Acts, the law that governs who can act on the monarch's behalf when they're unavailable. But in practice, it was a quiet coup. The removal of two royal names from the heart of monarchy's operational machinery. It didn't make front pages, but inside Buckingham Palace, it changed everything. So what exactly is this Councillor of State role? And why does it matter? Think of it as the monarchy's emergency protocol. If the king is abroad, ill, or otherwise unable to fulfill his duties, Councilors of State step in, signing official documents, attending meetings, performing ceremonial tasks. They're not symbolic stand-ins. They are legal extensions of the crown. Their signatures carry the same authority as the monarch's. Now imagine being stripped of that power. For Prince Harry and Prince Andrew, that's exactly what happened. One moment, their names were printed in history as constitutional representatives of the crown. The next, they were struck out, replaced quietly, cleanly, and permanently. No anger, no confrontation, just erasure. The move came in late 2022, only months after Charles took the throne. The timing was perfect, too perfect. Public attention was still fixated on the Queen's passing, the coronation plans, and the emotional transition from Elizabeth II to her son. The public eye was elsewhere, softened by grief and ceremony. In that emotional fog, the king made his first major power play. It began with a subtle letter to Parliament. It was short, precise, and steeped in legal courtesy. A proposal to widen the pool of Councillors of State to ensure the continued efficiency of the monarchy. No mention of removal. No hint of conflict. Just a practical adjustment for flexibility. But anyone familiar with royal language knows that flexibility is code for control. Behind that word was a calculated move to legally sideline two men whose association had become a liability. The letter was read aloud in the House of Lords by Lord Chamberlain Andrew Parker, the king's most discreet advisor. There were polite nods, murmured agreements, and the proposal quietly passed. The headlines didn't explode, they trickled. King Charles proposes adding Princess Anne and Prince Edward as Councillors of State. It sounded innocent enough. But buried beneath that phrasing was the real story. Harry and Andrew's authority was over. It's brilliant in its subtlety. Rather than announcing their removal, Charles simply expanded the list, adding trusted figures who would render the others irrelevant. A legal sleight of hand. Instead of confrontation, he used addition as subtraction. In politics, that's the cleanest execution possible. Inside palace corridors, the decision wasn't met with cheers, it was met with silence. Courtiers understood its significance. Charles had just drawn a line that even the late Queen had refused to cross. Elizabeth II, despite Andrew's disgrace and Harry's rebellion, had never stripped them of their constitutional privileges. It was her way of keeping the family intact, at least on paper. But Charles was cut from a different cloth. For him, this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about fortifying the crown. And if that meant tightening the circle, so be it. But here's where things get interesting. This amendment didn't just remove Harry and Andrew in practice. It also exposed how fragile royal law really is. Because the Councillor of State system, though steeped in centuries of tradition, was never built for scandal. It assumed that all royals were loyal, present, and capable. It never imagined a prince who'd move to California to start a media empire, or another who'd bring disgrace to the palace through association with a convicted criminal. The monarchy needed to adapt or collapse, and Charles, for all his flaws, saw it before anyone else did. But let's pause for a moment. How does a king rewrite royal law without igniting political chaos? Carefully, meticulously, with layers of plausible deniability. First came the consultation phase, quiet discussions between Buckingham Palace, Downing Street, and select members of the Privy Council. No one wanted this to look personal. The legal framing had to be airtight. The justification? To ensure the continued functionality of the crown. It sounded bureaucratic. It was anything but, because every word of that sentence was code for something deeper. Functionality meant reputation. Continued meant controlled. And crown meant Charles. One senior insider reportedly described the process as surgical. No emotional outbursts, no royal tantrums, no leaks. Just the slow, precise dismantling of two men's relevance. For weeks, drafts were reviewed, signatures prepared, and by the time the amendment reached Parliament, it was already a done deal. And that's when it happened, the quiet shift. One line of text, read by a civil servant, marked the end of an era. Imagine that. Decades of royal duty and public identity reduced to a single sentence in a parliamentary session that barely lasted 15 minutes. No public defense. No family vote. Just paperwork. If you've ever wondered how monarchy wields power in the modern world, this is it. Not through swords, not through speeches, through silence, process, and timing. And it worked. The British public barely blinked. The story was buried beneath lighter royal news, engagements, tours, ribbon cuttings. The average viewer scrolling through their feed saw princess and added to Councilors of State and moved on. Mission accomplished. No outrage, no debate, just quiet efficiency. But inside Montecito, the news hit differently. Reports suggest that Harry learned about the amendment through the media, not his father. That revelation alone speaks volumes. The monarchy didn't even extend the courtesy of warning him. He was no longer part of the inner circle, not even in name. Sources close to him say he felt crushed, blindsided, and yet defiant. He had insisted for years that the crown was a prison, but now that it had locked him out, the reality cut deep. Because the truth is, even rebels want to matter. And as for Andrew, his reaction was silence. The man who once strutted through royal ceremonies with pride now found himself reduced to a footnote. The Queen had been his shield. With her gone, there was no protection left. When the amendment passed, Andrew didn't speak publicly. He didn't issue statements. He didn't protest. He simply vanished. For a man who once commanded headlines, invisibility became his final punishment. But the quiet amendment didn't just exclude. It revealed the monarchy's new order. Charles wasn't merely trimming the branches. He was replanting the entire family tree. And at its roots, he placed only those he could trust implicitly. That's why the chosen replacements weren't random. They were symbols, calculated choices that told the world exactly what kind of King Charles intended to be. Princess Anne, the loyal sister, the no-nonsense royal who never complained, never courted scandal, never sold her story. She was duty incarnate, the anti-Harry in every sense. Prince Edward, the understated youngest brother, patient, steady, often overlooked but never disobedient. He'd spent decades quietly serving the crown without seeking recognition. Together, they represented what Charles valued most: discretion, discipline, and silence. And that's when people began to notice something eerie. Every person elevated in this reshuffle had one thing in common. They had all, in one way or another, protected Charles during his most vulnerable moments. Through the Diana years, through Camilla's rehabilitation, through the controversies that nearly cost him the crown. The message was unmistakable. This monarchy runs on loyalty, not lineage. But perhaps the most haunting part of this amendment is what it reveals about the monarchy's long-term fears. Because if you look closer, you realize it wasn't just about the present. It was about preparing for the future. For a monarchy that can no longer afford unpredictability, every move is about safeguarding the brand for the next generation. This was William's future being secured, a family structure stripped of volatility, curated for stability. Harry's removal? That was William's buffer. Andrew's exclusion? That was reputational insurance. Together, they cleared the path for a cleaner monarchy, one less vulnerable to scandal, emotion, or rebellion. But even the most well-crafted plan has cracks. And this amendment carries one subtle flaw that no one in the palace talks about: a legal loophole. Because technically, under the current structure, both Harry and Andrew remain eligible to serve as Councilors of State unless explicitly removed from the line of succession. In theory, if a constitutional emergency arose and not enough eligible royals were available, their names could still come into play. Imagine the irony. The very men the monarchy wants erased might still, by law, retain a flicker of power. And that's what makes this story so compelling. On the surface, it's a clean act of control. But underneath, it's chaos barely contained by paper and protocol. A monarchy trying to modernize without admitting how fragile it truly is. Even now, insiders whisper that Charles's decision came with private anguish. He understood the optics: a father stripping power from his son, a brother erasing his sibling's last shred of dignity. But duty, in his mind, outweighed emotion. This was the king acting, not the man. The same Charles who once spent decades waiting for a throne now spends his days defending it. Every move is about survival. Every silence, a statement. And yet, something about the timing remains suspicious. Why so soon after taking the throne? Why not wait until the public had settled into his reign? Because this wasn't just administrative, it was preemptive. Charles knows what's coming. Rumors of memoirs, new interviews, and possibly more revelations from Montecito have made him paranoid. By stripping Harry's authority early, he ensured that when the next bombshell drops, it won't damage the monarchy's inner workings. It's not punishment, it's insulation. But here's the twist that no one in the press quite captured. This quiet amendment wasn't Charles's idea alone. It was influenced, heavily, by another royal mind. Someone who understands the machinery of monarchy better than anyone alive. Someone who spent decades studying its weaknesses. Princess Anne. That's right. The Princess Royal, known for her stoic demeanor and fierce loyalty, reportedly urged her brother to take decisive action before public sentiment turned. Cut once, not twice, she's said to have advised. In other words, remove both problems at once, swiftly and without emotion. Don't wait for the next scandal. End it before it begins. That counsel became the backbone of Charles's approach. Efficient, ruthless, necessary, and it worked. The monarchy, for now, stands stable. But at what cost? Because while Charles may have secured his reign, he's fractured his family beyond repair. Harry's trust? Gone. Andrew's dignity? Destroyed. The Queen's legacy of quiet unity? Replaced by cold precision. The crown endures, yes, but its heart grows smaller with every calculated move. Still, for those watching from the inside, one truth is becoming impossible to ignore. This amendment wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. The first domino in a series of silent restructures designed to reshape the monarchy for decades to come. And as history has shown, when the palace starts rewriting its own rules, it's never just about politics. It's about power and the secrets that must be buried to keep it. It wasn't the announcement of who was removed that stunned those closest to the crown. It was who replaced them. Because when King Charles quietly expanded the list of Councilors of State, the public barely noticed the deeper message written between the lines. It wasn't just a shuffle. It was a revelation of who truly runs the monarchy now. The monarchy, at least in its outward form, thrives on illusion. The balcony appearances, the smiles, the perfect choreography, all designed to make you believe in unity. But real power has always rested in the unseen relationships, the whispered alliances, and the trust of one man, the king. And for the first time in his long, complicated life, Charles had the authority to shape that circle himself. So when he signed the amendment expanding the Councilors of State, it wasn't just a procedural act. It was a coronation of loyalty, a formal declaration of who he believed deserved to stand at his side, not because of birthright, but because of allegiance. Two names rose above the rest, Princess and Prince Edward. On the surface, the choice looked practical, logical. The king's sister and his youngest brother, both experienced, scandal-free, and deeply respected. But beneath that surface, this was something far more personal. These were not just royal siblings. They were Charles's last line of defense. Because Anne and Edward had done something that neither Harry nor Andrew could, they stayed. Through decades of controversy, through Diana's death, through Camilla's public scorn, through the family fractures, they stayed loyal, silent, and dependable. Let's start with Anne, the steel spine of the royal family. From the outside, Princess Anne has always seemed like the quiet workhorse, stoic and reserved, living her life far from tabloid glamour. But within royal circles, she is something else entirely. A strategist, a truth-teller, and the one person who can look the king in the eye and tell him when he's wrong. Her loyalty isn't blind, it's earned. She doesn't flatter. She corrects. During the chaos of Charles's marriage to Diana, it was Anne who refused to choose sides publicly. When Camilla was vilified in the press, it was Anne who insisted on family unity, not for affection, but for preservation. She understands that monarchy isn't a family business, it's survival theater. And in her mind, sentiment is the enemy of endurance. That's why she stood by Charles during the transition to his reign with a kind of quiet ferocity. The world was mourning their mother. The institution was vulnerable. And Anne knew it. Behind palace doors, she reportedly told advisors, the first 100 days will define whether he rules as a father or as a monarch. He cannot be both. Those words became gospel. Charles listened. And when it came time to choose who would hold power in his absence, Anne was the first name on his list. Not because she's next in line, but because she's the one he trusts most to act without ego. And doesn't crave headlines. She craves control. Then there's Edward, the underestimated Windsor. For decades, he was the forgotten prince, overshadowed by his siblings' drama and his wife's quiet diligence. But Edward's greatest asset has always been his consistency. No scandals, no rebellion, just quiet obedience wrapped in genuine goodwill. He's the kind of royal who never makes the front page, but without him, the institution would crumble from exhaustion. While Harry courted cameras and Andrew courted controversy, Edward spent decades doing the royal grunt work, the hospital visits, charity openings, and untelevised ceremonies that keep the monarchy's heartbeat steady. Charles saw that. He rewarded it. By elevating Anne and Edward as Councilors of State, the king didn't just fill positions, he formed a wall, a defensive line of loyalty around his reign. And make no mistake, that wall wasn't built to protect the crown from outsiders. It was built to protect it from family. Because deep down, Charles knows his enemies aren't in Parliament or the press. They're the ones who share his blood. The pattern is unmistakable. The late Queen's inner circle was built on balance, a mix of duty, sentiment, and legacy. She never removed Andrew despite the pressure. She never punished Harry outright. Her reign was about maintaining appearances, even at personal cost. Charles's monarchy, however, is about consolidation, efficiency, emotional austerity, and it shows in every new appointment he's made. Alongside Anne and Edward, the king quietly reinforced his network with a handful of trusted allies, non-royal advisors whose influence has grown dramatically since his accession. Former aides from his decades as Prince of Wales, Camilla's confidants, and longtime staffers who operate with near-military precision. Together, they form what palace insiders now call the core cabinet, a new inner sanctum. Within that cabinet, three voices carry particular weight. Sir Clive Alderton, Charles's private secretary, Fiona Msilwam, one of the most respected royal aides of her generation, and of course, Queen Camilla herself. Camilla's role in this circle can't be overstated. For years, she was the outsider, the woman history seemed determined to despise. But over time, she became the monarchy's quiet master of narrative. She doesn't issue decrees. She influences decisions through tone, through timing, through understanding Charles better than anyone alive. Some insiders even suggest that this new power structure, this recalibration of counselors, bears Camilla's fingerprints. She knows how fragile the king's public image remains. She knows that any association with Harry or Andrew reopens wounds that took decades to scar over. And so, with her subtle, persuasive hand, she helped reshape the monarchy into a smaller, tighter, more controllable unit. Call it what it is, the Camilla era has begun. And if you think that's an exaggeration, look at the appointments. Every name elevated in this transition is someone who either defended her or quietly supported her when the world mocked her relationship with Charles. Loyalty has become currency, and Camilla holds the vault. But here's where things take a darker turn. This new inner circle, tight, loyal, impenetrable, may protect the king, but it also isolates him. By surrounding himself with those who agree, who understand, who shield him, Charles has unintentionally created an echo chamber. There's no dissent left in the palace. No one to challenge his vision. No one to bridge the gap between the crown and the estranged. And Edward, for all their integrity, are not mediators. They're enforcers of order. They maintain discipline, not dialogue. And that means the distance between the king and the rest of his family grows wider by the day. Even William, though the heir apparent, operates at arm's length from this core group. His relationship with his father remains polite but professional. They're united by duty, divided by temperament. William's loyalty lies with the future, his own reign, not his father's inner circle. Which begs the question, if Charles has fortified his monarchy against his own family, what happens when that wall becomes his prison? Because history is cruelly consistent, monarchs who surround themselves only with loyalty eventually lose touch with truth. The people stop seeing a family and start seeing an institution run by calculation. And once that perception sets in, it's almost impossible to reverse. Still, the king's strategy worked, for now. The scandal scarred have been pushed out. The loyalists have been brought in. The narrative feels stable. But stability is not the same as peace. Because make no mistake, the excluded aren't done. Harry's silence, when it comes, is never permanent. Every pause is a prelude. His next move, whether it's a new project, an interview, or another book, could once again shift public opinion. And Andrew, though stripped of relevance, remains a potential liability. His mere existence is a constant reminder of the monarchy's moral double standards. That's why this new inner circle isn't just about trust. It's about containment. Keeping the crown insulated from both external chaos and internal rebellion. And Edward aren't just councillors of state. They're guardians of image. Custodians of silence. But silence has a cost. Behind closed doors, some palace staff whisper that the king has become more isolated than ever. Less accessible, less forgiving, more suspicious. His circle of advisors has narrowed to a point where disagreement feels like betrayal. And in that kind of environment, mistakes don't get corrected, they multiply in the dark. Even now, some senior courtiers question whether this new order, though stable, is sustainable. Because while it may protect the crown from scandal, it also strips it of humanity. The monarchy that once prided itself on connection, handshakes, smiles, emotional resilience, now feels colder, almost corporate. The king has built a monarchy that runs like a business, but looks less like a family. And that transformation, while deliberate, may become his greatest vulnerability. Because the one thing the British monarchy can never afford to lose is the illusion of heart. And with Harry and Andrew gone, that heart is missing. And Edward may preserve the structure, but they can't inspire emotion. The public respects them, but they don't feel for them. That emotional void is dangerous. It's what drove the popularity of Diana, the fascination with Meghan, and the nostalgia for the Queen. People crave connection. And right now, this inner circle offers efficiency, not empathy. It's the perfect machinery of monarchy, but the soul is fading. Still, Charles's message remains unambiguous. The monarchy, under his watch, will not be hostage to emotion. It will be disciplined, curated, loyal, even if it has to be lonely. And as the ink dried on the amendment that formally elevated his trusted allies, a new chapter of royal power began. The old guard, scandalous, unpredictable, emotional, was gone. The new guard, steady, silent, loyal, had arrived. But here's the twist. Even within this carefully chosen circle, there's tension. And maybe loyal, but she's fiercely independent. Edward may be compliant, but his wife, Sophie, has growing influence and opinions. And Camilla, the queen, is not just a supporting act anymore. She's steering the tone of the entire monarchy. 3 powerful personalities, 1 aging king, and a family legacy still haunted by ghosts of rebellion. The new inner circle may have stabilized the monarchy for now, but it's a fragile balance. Because beneath the polished surface, old grudges and private rivalries are simmering. And when those finally break through, this new royal order could collapse from within. Because as one palisade put it recently, every circle eventually tightens until it strangles itself. And that's exactly what's about to happen. Because even as the king solidified his inner ranks, he overlooked one crucial element: a voice from the past. A single document that could undo everything he's built. A document written not by him, but by the one person whose word still carries more weight than his crown: Queen Elizabeth II. Her hidden clause, her unspoken wish. And when it comes to light, it will challenge every decision Charles has made. Every monarch leaves behind a will. But Queen Elizabeth II, meticulous to the end, left something far more potent than wealth or jewels. She left instructions. And within those private documents, whispered about but never publicly confirmed, lies what insiders now call the hidden clause. A final directive that could unravel King Charles's carefully crafted order and rewrite the meaning of royal succession itself. For 70 years, Elizabeth II was the monarchy. Her presence was its stability. Her silence was its authority. She governed not by force, but by moral weight. A force so profound that even her children, grown adults with crowns and scandals of their own, deferred to her until her dying breath. Every major royal decision, from marriages to titles to family exiles, carried her shadow. So imagine the audacity, the danger of defying her last words. And yet, that is precisely what King Charles is accused of doing. Let's go back to the final months of her reign. Quiet, secluded, marked by failing health but sharp clarity. Those closest to her say she spent hours reviewing her personal papers, a set of handwritten notes outlining her expectations for the monarchy after her death. Not law, not decree, but something stronger: royal intent. The crown's conscience on paper. Among those papers, according to whispers from palace aides and government sources, was a clause, one specific instruction regarding the composition of the Councilors of State. It wasn't a detailed mandate, just a line or two expressing her wish that certain members of the family should retain the confidence of the crown in perpetuity. And two of the names allegedly listed? Prince Harry and Prince Andrew. Now, why would she include them, especially given their controversies? The answer is simple: the Queen never believed in permanent exile. To her, the monarchy was a family first and an institution second. Her strength came from forgiveness. Her reign, though disciplined, was merciful. She believed redemption, not rejection, preserved the soul of the crown. But Charles believes otherwise. For him, mercy invites chaos. Forgiveness undermines authority. And so, despite his mother's supposed request, he acted in opposition, rewriting the rules she had carefully woven to ensure that no royal, however disgraced or rebellious, was left without a path home. To understand the magnitude of that choice, you have to understand what the hidden clause truly meant. It wasn't about Andrew or Harry alone. It was about continuity. Elizabeth knew the monarchy would face turbulence after her passing. The public would compare her reign to her son's. She understood that removing too many family members from royal function could destabilize the institution she spent a lifetime preserving. The clause, therefore, wasn't sentimentality, it was strategy, a safeguard against division. And yet, within a year of her death, Charles had undone it. When news of the amendment broke, those who had seen the late Queen's papers were reportedly stunned. One former royal aide confided anonymously, it wasn't just a policy shift. It felt like betrayal. The Queen had left a map for stability, and Charles threw it away. Inside the palace, whispers grew louder. Why would he defy her? Why take such a risk so early in his reign? Some say it was Camilla's influence, her quiet insistence that the monarchy could not survive another scandal tied to Andrew or another rebellion from Harry. Others claim it was William's strategic push, his belief that a streamlined monarchy was necessary for the 21st century, that nostalgia for the Queen's leniency no longer worked in the age of instant outrage. But the most compelling theory is the simplest one. Charles wanted to rule differently. For 70 years, he was the heir in waiting, constrained by his mother's legacy. Now, for the first time, he could build his own. And if that meant tearing up her unwritten instructions, so be it. Yet something strange happened after the amendment passed. Documents began to surface, carefully, strategically, as if someone inside wanted the world to know that the Queen's hidden clause existed. Letters, notes, aides' recollections. One claimed that during her final months, Elizabeth had told a senior courtier, "The family must remain whole. No matter what happens, they must always be able to serve the crown." It wasn't a formal order, but in royal tradition, the Queen's word was law. So, if that was true, Charles's exclusion of Harry and Andrew wasn't just a policy change. It was a direct contradiction of his mother's dying wish. And that's where the drama deepens. Because this wasn't just about family dynamics, it was about legacy. The monarchy survives on myth, and one of its greatest myths is continuity. That the new sovereign carries forward the will and values of the old. By defying Elizabeth's instructions, Charles didn't just alter the system. He disrupted that sacred illusion of seamless transition. Publicly, the palace has never acknowledged any such clause. When pressed, spokespeople describe reports of the Queen's written wishes as unfounded speculation. But royal watchers know better. The Windsors never deny what they can quietly bury. Behind closed doors, tension brewed. Senior courtiers loyal to the late Queen reportedly clashed with Charles's new advisors. One side argued for preservation, to honor Elizabeth's legacy as written. The other insisted on modernization, to reflect the king's vision. The result was a silent war, fought through paperwork and parliamentary briefs, invisible to the public but seismic within the palace walls. And through it all, one question haunted every corridor. What else did the Queen write? Because if she left one clause about the councillors, what if there were others? Clauses about the succession, about Camilla's title, about royal finances, about the role of William's children in future governance. The possibility terrified Charles's advisors. Every letter, every sealed envelope became a potential threat. According to palace sources, not all of the Queen's private papers have been fully disclosed, even to Charles himself. Some are kept under lock and key in a special vault at Windsor, accessible only to a handful of officials appointed by her personally. Documents meant to guide future monarchs, sealed for decades. And among them, perhaps, lies the truth about the clause, and whether the king knowingly defied it. If confirmed, such a revelation could shake his reign. Not legally, but morally. Because monarchy isn't held together by law, it's held together by faith. The faith that every sovereign upholds the values of their predecessors. If that faith cracks, even quietly, the institution weakens. Now imagine the emotional weight of this. For Charles, the decision must have been excruciating. To overrule his mother, the woman who defined not just his childhood, but his entire existence as a royal, is a burden few can fathom. For 70 years, he lived in her shadow, forever the eternal heir. She outshone him in grace, discipline, and devotion. Her death didn't just make him king, it made him responsible for her legacy. And perhaps, deep down, he resented it. Perhaps this decision was less about practicality and more about finally stepping out of that shadow. But in doing so, he may have committed the one act the Queen would never have forgiven, breaking family unity for the sake of control. Because no matter how much she loved the monarchy, Elizabeth loved her family more. She forgave Andrew long after the public stopped. She smiled through Harry's rebellion when the rest of the family seethed. Her strength came from inclusion, not exclusion. And that's why her supposed clause wasn't just symbolic. It was the cornerstone of her philosophy. When she wrote those words, "Retain the confidence of the crown in perpetuity," she wasn't protecting individuals. She was protecting the family's image of resilience. She was ensuring that no scandal, no rift, no rebellion could permanently divide the House of Windsor. Now, that shield is gone. And the irony? The very decision meant to secure the monarchy's stability has instead reopened its deepest fractures. Because Harry, ever the storyteller, has reportedly heard whispers of this clause himself. Through what channels? No one knows. But sources close to Montecito claim he was furious upon learning that his grandmother's final wish had been ignored. To him, it confirmed his worst suspicion, that his father isn't just defending the crown, he's rewriting its truth. And that anger, once ignited, doesn't fade. It festers. In one telling, a close friend of the Sussexes recalled Harry saying, "If she left her words, and they still erased me, then what's the point of family?" A line heavy with both hurt and accusation. If that statement is true, it signals something monumental. The last emotional bridge between Harry and the crown has burned. And Andrew? Silence. Again. But those who know him say he clings to the Queen's memory like a life raft. Every mention of her name reportedly brings him to tears. For him, the hidden clause represents more than forgiveness. It represents identity. As long as he believed his mother still saw him as redeemable, he could endure the humiliation. But with Charles dismantling even that symbolic hope, Andrew is a man stripped of past and future alike. It's tragic, really. Two men who embodied everything wrong with the monarchy, arrogance, recklessness, privilege, now reduced to symbols of its coldness. And through it all, one truth looms over Buckingham Palace: the Queen's ghost still reigns. Every photograph of her on the wall, every portrait hanging in the corridors, every whisper of "what would she have done?" reminds the king that his decisions live in comparison. He can never escape her shadow. He can only try to outgovern it. That's why this hidden clause, whether myth or reality, terrifies the palace. Because it resurrects her authority from beyond the grave. It makes her absence louder than her presence ever was. And as royal historians continue to probe, as journalists dig for evidence, as insiders leak fragments of those private papers, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The Queen may be gone, but her words still hold the power to haunt. What happens if the clause is proven true? If a leaked memo, an aide's note, or a photograph of her handwriting surfaces, the monarchy would face a moral reckoning unlike anything since the abdication of 1936. The narrative of Charles as the steady hand would collapse overnight. He would be seen as the son who defied his mother's dying wish for control, the reformer who chose coldness over compassion. And the public, the same public that adored Elizabeth's grace, would judge him harshly. Because for all the monarchy's pomp, the people still crave humanity. They don't want perfection. They want decency. And in this case, decency might have died with the Queen. But perhaps the most devastating twist lies ahead. Because as these whispers grow louder, there's talk, quiet, careful, dangerous talk, that the document might still exist somewhere outside the royal vault. Not in a palace, not in a government archive, but in private hands. A personal copy, entrusted to someone the Queen believed she could rely on absolutely. Someone still alive. And if that person ever decides to reveal it, the monarchy won't just face embarrassment, it'll face exposure. The kind that no PR team, no speech, no coronation can undo. Because what's buried in that clause isn't just a set of names. It's a question: what kind of king defies his mother's last wish? And when that question reaches the public, when the truth finally surfaces, the image of Charles as the wise, modern monarch will crack. And from those cracks, old ghosts will rise, and they'll bring the monarchy's deepest secrets with them. Because if the Queen's clause is ever confirmed, then one fact becomes undeniable. The king's power was built not on legacy, but on defiance. It happened the way most royal bombshells do, quietly, cruelly, and without warning. One morning, half a world away from Buckingham Palace, Prince Harry scrolled through his phone and saw a headline that froze him in place. King Charles updates Councilors of State. Princess and Prince Edward added. He didn't need to read the article to know what that meant. His name, once inscribed in royal law, had just been replaced. No call from the palace. No letter. No formal notice. Just a headline. That was how he found out he'd been written out of the monarchy. The irony wasn't lost on him. For years, Harry had claimed he'd escaped the suffocating control of the firm, that he'd finally taken his freedom into his own hands. But now, as the realization sank in, freedom felt like exile. There was a difference between walking away and being pushed out. He looked up from his phone, Meghan across the room in their Montecito living room, sunlight filtering through glass walls that still felt too pristine, too curated. A mansion that looked like security but felt like a stage. She saw the look on his face and knew before he said a word. "They've done it, haven't they?" she asked. Harry nodded. "They've cut me out." For a long moment, neither spoke. Meghan reached for his hand, but he barely noticed. His mind was already racing through the layers of insult. It wasn't the exclusion itself. He'd expected that one day. It was how it was done. The silence. The ease. The message between the lines. You don't belong anymore. For a man who'd spent his life defined by duty, the loss of purpose hit harder than he'd anticipated. Titles were one thing. Function was another. Being a Councilor of State wasn't ceremonial. It was symbolic power. It meant that even from afar, he was still part of the system that made him who he was. Now, that connection was gone. He felt it like a phantom limb, something invisible but missing. Hours later, when the news channels began looping commentary, he saw how easily the story was spun. A practical move to ensure efficient governance, one analyst said. Perfectly sensible, said another. Not one mention of what it meant for him personally. No empathy. No acknowledgement that behind that efficiency was a son being erased by his father. That night, as cameras waited outside the gates of their California estate, Harry refused to speak. But inside, the rage was boiling. How could he do this? He muttered, pacing the room. After everything I've tried to explain. Megan's voice was calm, measured, the tone of someone who's learned that emotion only feeds headlines. He had to do it, Harry. They need control. You took your power by leaving. This is just their way of pretending they took it back. But her words didn't soothe him.